All right, Cory and Makori. I love it. Very good to be here. Great energy, very exciting. Before we start off, Cory, I just want to acknowledge something that you shared with me personally that I found very touching. And the song that was playing as we got up on the stage was in fact performed by your late brother, Matt, who sadly lost his fight against brain cancer. But you wanted to play the song as a tribute to him and an acknowledgement to him. And for me, that shows how personally invested and connected you are with Pacific Bitcoin, and the mission.
Yeah, it was really nice to hear a couple of bars of Fever. I know the feeling, you got the fever. And he wrote that a long time ago, but as I got into Bitcoin and then he also got into Bitcoin, we used to make jokes about how appropriate that was. And actually, we actually cut 8 episodes of a podcast in 21 just before and after his diagnosis, and we were using that song as the intro music for the show as well. So,
aptly named Fever, and I think safe to say everybody here has Bitcoin fever or orange fever. So let's focus on where we are now that it's the second Pacific Bitcoin conference. And a lot has happened in a year. A lot can happen in a Bitcoin year. Last conference took place in November, and that was exactly the time that we saw the FTX scandals start to collapse and unravel with SBF. Now, you, Cory, actually highlighted that SBF was a fraud and a scam via tweets and interviews long before any of this broke out. In fact, when he was seen as the golden boy of crypto, you were waving a red flag around him and around FTX. And it's due to some of your work that the whole fraud got exposed. I believe a CoinDesk reporter gave you the balance sheet of Alameda to analyze, and you flagged that there were some very serious issues there and actually led to this whole thing unraveling. So thank you for your service there. But where are we, right? It's a year since then, give or take more or less. SBF's on trial. Bitcoin was 16,000 then. It's recovered. Where are we in terms of the fallout from the FTX collapse?
yeah, it's still roiling a bit, and it's still a bit uncertain which way things are going to go broadly. There's obviously a lot of litigation continuing to go on, some civil suits, a lot of actions by the SEC against various players in the crypto industry, and of course, the backdrop of the current actual trial of scam bankster fraud, as we started calling him last year, and we'll see what happens with that. I would say versus what I would have thought would happen maybe looking at this a year ago, I would have actually thought the legal and regulatory backlash against the crypto platforms would have been quite a bit more or more effective.
Right.
So this I would say is a lot of people getting away with it so far. Got a lot of people that did really bad things just kind of still hanging out on boats and moving to Dubai and Singapore instead of being in jail. So yeah. I think most people got away with it.
Yeah, well, on the regulation front, there was thinking that this would, in a way, lay the groundwork for regulators to march in with ferocity and indignation and really attack the sector. I mean, we're still seeing regulation being very vague and hazy, potentially by design, but we didn't really see that tremendous backlash. In fact, on the contrary, we could argue that we're seeing potentially more acceptance in the sense that we could have a spot Bitcoin ETF approved. Looks likely. Before we get into that, we're also seeing a landscape where Bitcoin has become an issue in a presidential race. I mean, it's fascinating to see that it's a bipartisan issue being talked about by, well, one of the leading Republican candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy, a big Bitcoin proponent, and Democratic challenger, potentially running as an independent, RFK, saying that if he wins, he would back the US dollar with commodities, gold, silver, and Bitcoin. I mean, that's a pretty momentous place to be a year later. How do you see Bitcoin playing out in the political sphere?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you can certainly garner a lot of support from people that have Bitcoin at or near the top of their list by coming out for Bitcoin, and that's just good marketing in general, as we've seen for almost any product category. there are a lot of Bitcoiners around the world that will like you and your show or your merchandise or your conference or whatever it is if you come out and start doing good things for Bitcoin. The worry that I think a lot of us have with some of the politicians is a lot of times they hang up a flag and say, go Bitcoin.
Right.
And it's actually kind of a...
You mean we can't trust politicians, Cory? We can't take what they say at face value?
It's been said. It's been said. And a lot of times they're really just kind of hanging up a flag and saying, hey, I'm open for business. And then essentially the altcoin scammers come and start funding their campaigns. And then they start inserting and crypto into all of their speeches and their policy statements. And essentially all of this legislation that's being drafted by the people that came out pro-Bitcoin 2 years ago is actually being drafted by Consensus, Blockchain Association, kind of all the crypto people are drafting the legislation that's coming out from these formerly pro-Bitcoin reps and senators.
All right, so concerned that they're not just interested in Bitcoin, but pandering to the crypto crowd at large, and that may not have the best ramifications for Bitcoin? I mean, would the downside be what?
In the long run, it doesn't really matter for Bitcoin. It's just another example of essentially if you say you're going to regulate something, then the industry that's going to get regulated is going to come and pay for capturing it.
But again, Bitcoin itself is a bipartisan issue that has bipartisan support. I mean, it's one of the few issues that there is agreement on across the aisle, and not just on the presidential candidate side. We've got Senator Kristen Gillibrand from New York agreeing with Senator Loomis. That's very rare in today's Washington. So in the context of that, given that this potential support, does it protect Bitcoin from the tail risk of an existential crisis of being outlawed? Are you comfortable at this point saying that Bitcoin in the US will no longer be outlawed?
So, as anyone who was here last year knows, I see this in the framework of the race to avoid the war, and this idea that if you can essentially flip US society to the point that there are enough people that own a lot of Bitcoin and are willing to fight for it, where it's kind of their single issue that they care the most about, then it will just be impossible to ban Bitcoin on-ramps and be sort of have the State Department coordinate something, through all branches of government that would come down hard on Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. The risk is not zero.
It's still not zero.
It's still not zero. It looks like zero because if you look at the government the way it is today, you can't imagine that happening. But what we don't know is what this government will look like in 7 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, especially given the cracks in the system that are showing and what cracks in the financial system and sort of the economics of a country tend to do to your governmental system. It's usually a backslide into some sort of totalitarianism or tyranny that follows, and then you could see something done much more in the way of just executive orders or something like that that could be stupid, rushed, and bad for Bitcoin and Bitcoiners.
Yeah, all right, fair enough, especially as, it is in a way a threat to central bank fiat printing, so that may change the course of how things develop in Washington. But we have the BlackRock spot Bitcoin ETF looking like it could be approved, and we'll get into the pros and cons of that. But BlackRock, world's largest asset manager, around $10 trillion of assets under management, arguably one of the branches of government in terms of the political influence that BlackRock enjoys, very tied into the establishment. So the fact that BlackRock has applied for the spot Bitcoin ETF leads one to believe that it will get approved. BlackRock has a near perfect record of ETF approvals. They filed for 550 and only got one rejected. So the math is in their favor. And it's a very big turnaround from Larry Fink, who back in 2018 said that Bitcoin was essentially an index to see how much money laundering has been done in the world. Quite the about face there. But here we are with Bitcoin, with BlackRock looking to launch the spot Bitcoin ETF. What are the chances that it gets approved? Do you think that this will happen?
Yeah, I mean, it looks really likely that a few ETFs will be approved probably in 2024. I expect them to be live and trading. That's kind of my mental model for planning what we do at Swan and thinking about how things will develop. That's that in 80% plus likelihood is probably where I'm factoring that in, and it will happen unless something different happens. It's on that path to definitely happening unless something comes out of left field and stops it.
Right, and a number of BlackRock insiders have said that they do believe that several will be approved at once, with some of the leading players. That collectively is $19 trillion of assets under management that could go into the Bitcoin space, and it could lead to an inflow of $150 to $200 billion into Bitcoin investment products over 3 years by some estimates. The question is this actually a good thing? It may be good for the number go up people, it may be good for the price, but is it contrary to the decentralized sound money mission of Bitcoin? If we have BlackRock, which would essentially take custody of a large chunk of Bitcoin, centralizing it, BlackRock also moving into the mining space. It's bought shares in 4 of the largest miners, so sort of taking control of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Does that jeopardize the ethos of Bitcoin, the decentralized mission of what Bitcoin is supposed to be?
Well, I think you meant to say taking an economic position in the Bitcoin ecosystem, not control. Because neither of things give you any control.
Taking a concentrated position, right?
Yes.
Well, taking custody of a large chunk, but it may move its tentacles to have control over the ecosystem.
They can certainly try. They can certainly try. But again, them owning shares of Bitcoin miners, and again, only some of the Bitcoin miners that happen to be publicly listed in the USA, which is not all of the hash rate or even close. And also doing that largely on behalf of their clients, not themselves. It's not their own balance sheet that's investing in these. So that one has never really bothered me at all. And miners don't control the network anyway; the nodes do. As far as political influence, and what does it mean to have all this Bitcoin under custody? Satoshi and Hal wrote from the very beginning that there were going to be funds of holding Bitcoin and banks holding Bitcoin and their buyers as well, right? A business is just something that's owned by a group of people and controlled by a group of people. So whether we like it or not, it's inevitable that governments, pension funds, asset managers, banks will hold large chunks of Bitcoin. They're not going to do it the way that we do. They're not going to have self-sovereign money. They're going to have committees sharing keys and voting on different things, and it's just not as good a product. Paper Bitcoin is not as good a product as self-sovereign money in your cold storage.
Well, sure. And again, that's what I'm saying. Does it defy the whole ethos of Bitcoin of being an independent form of money away from the institutions? Are we ruining this perfect form of pure sound money by putting it in to a broken system? Because with an exchange, if you buy into the exchange-traded fund of a spot Bitcoin ETF, it'll probably be appealing to a lot of retail investors that are intimidated by self-custody and wallets and exchanges. And I've heard about Bitcoin, want exposure to it, and this is an easy way for them to do it. But they're not actually adopting Bitcoin. They're buying shares, so they're not actually taking control of their money and sort of liberating themselves in the way that it's supposed to be. Like, is spot Bitcoin ETF adoption actually Bitcoin adoption?
No, it's not, but it's further down the funnel than buying altcoins.
Okay, so less bad.
Yeah, it's less bad. It's a better top of funnel to get toward understanding Bitcoin, because and this is something that you and I have talked about before. When I think about a business like Swan or businesses like Bull Bitcoin, that are doing the Bitcoin on-ramp thing and Bitcoin adoption, this is a massive improvement for us, because instead of having to make the pitch to someone, hey, I see you're buying these altcoins, those are a scam. Implicitly, that makes the person feel attacked. It's a bruise to their ego because they feel like they got scammed, or that they're hearing from a Bitcoiner that they got scammed. It's a massive, really, really hard for somebody to get over that.
You're very good at that,
and be ego-free, right? Now, if we have Vanguard, Fidelity, BlackRock, Van Eck, all these people pushing Bitcoin education, they're handing out books by Lynn Alden and Safety and VJ and, pointing to Bitcoin podcasts and, hiring Bitcoiners to go and hawk their wares or whatever. Now you've created, a top of funnel baseline of Bitcoin education that has people partway down the rabbit hole. And all we have to do is step in and say, thank you for the $500 million of free marketing that we didn't have to pay for. Here's real Bitcoin, and it's cheaper than your ETF. And we can convert the whole world from the ETFs into real Bitcoin.
All right, so that's an encouraging note. You'll use them to help promote the mission, to help promote the message. So not necessarily seeing it as a threat to companies like Swan that advocate for self-custody and adoption. On the contrary, you think that it'll help with the messaging?
Oh yeah, this is like probably the most bullish thing happening next year for the financial services part of our business. All
right, I want to, we touched a little bit on the miners, but I want to go a little bit into the rabbit hole of one of the conspiracy theories there, because I do think it's interesting when you have a company like BlackRock do this sudden about-face, a company that is very aggressive in promoting an ESG narrative and has actually said that it uses its clout to force what they call good behaviors. And there is some concern that if they move into the mining space and take control over the ecosystem, that they could use that to convert the network from proof of work to proof of stake at some point. And the reason that this is being flagged is that in BlackRock's application for a Bitcoin ETF, it states that should Bitcoin experience a hard fork, that is, an agreed upon change to its underlying code, BlackRock will use its discretion to determine which version of Bitcoin is the appropriate network for the trust's purposes. So the thinking is, BlackRock comes in, large Bitcoin ETF, becomes successful, heavily funds Bitcoin development, proposes regulatory and eco-friendly proof-of-stake fork, loses community opinion, but adopts the fork as Bitcoin anyway, and proof-of-work fork becomes, for pirates in El Salvador and outsider people. And I'm using journalist Chris Black's sentiment here. Is this something that concerns you? Do you see that happening?
So, I love to put percentage weightings on scenarios and talk about mental models and things. This is literally not in my threat model at all. So I discount that to zero.
All right.
It's just not an issue.
Not something that's keeping
it would just
Cory
be
up at night.
There's so many people that have so much money that are so smart and understand Bitcoin so well that there's just absolutely zero chance that BlackRock trying to fork to a proof-of-stake protocol would be anything but just an embarrassment and losing all the money of the people that unfortunately had their private keys custodied by BlackRock.
All right. Certainly helping me sleep better at night. I do tend to delve into the dark rabbit holes of conspiracy theory. So having said all of this, you're pretty optimistic. Let's fast forward to where you see Bitcoin in the financial system, and I'll give you two timelines. I'll start off with the very near term, next year's specific Bitcoin. Where do you see Bitcoin in the financial system?
So just literally 1 year from today?
1 year from today.
Okay. So yeah, I think we'll be adjusting to this new world that has the ETFs as top of funnel messaging, and they'll be rolling out massive ad campaigns promoting Bitcoin in sports stadiums and in major newspapers and on CNBC constantly. I think all the talking heads will be talking about Bitcoin basically nonstop because it's going to happen at about the same time as the halving. ETFs rolling out, it'll just be this kind of back in the public scene. It'll skyrocket on Google search and all this stuff again. I don't know what that does for price because usually there's been a lag post-halving before things start to really take off in another cycle. And we also don't know if cycles will keep happening the way they have historically forever. But again, chances are until they stop, you got to kind of bank on something like that happening. So I think it could get really exciting. And then the other thing we've seen time and time again is a loosening of monetary policy in election years. And it does seem like we've probably peaked in interest rate rises. And you've all heard from a lot of the much smarter macro heads on this stage than I throughout the last day and a half that we're probably looking at some loosening of monetary policy, or at least a pause in the rises. So yeah, there's a good likelihood that liquidity starts to flow again next year, and there could be a little bit of... My up scenario is that there's kind of a perfect storm of anticipation of a price rise from the halving because of the halving meme, plus the ETFs, plus risk on, brought on by increased liquidity. And I don't know what this conference looks like if it's 2 or 3 times bigger. I kind of like it at this size, but just so you know, this crew that puts this on, you can actually do a 10,000 person conference when you put up tents in the parking lots and things like that. So we have room. We don't have to move.
That room for expansion. That may also mean more competition for you on the basketball court. I know you won again. You're the twice reigning champion, but more people, I don't know. You could be dethroned there with the 3-point.
Listen, it's not. You can't pry that trophy from my hand very easily. I'm going for 3 next year.
All right, so more people, more competition, but you are still confident that you will be the reigning champion of the 3-point throw. But let's fast forward to 2030. And I use that timeline, 7 years now, for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is it's a time period that Satoshi highlighted. On Bitcoin Talk, the forum that he used to talk about Bitcoin and advocate for it, and engaged in numerous conversations. In 2010, Satoshi posted, "I'm sure that in 20 years there will either be very large transaction volume or no volume." So 20 years from 2010, that puts up at 2030. Where are we going to be in 2030?
I don't do short-term price predictions ever, but I have been saying for a few years that I think we will be at sat cent parity by 2030, which is $1 million a coin. It may seem aggressive when you're sitting here at 27,000 or whatever kind of extended bear market, but we've seen tremendous rises in the price in bull markets previously, and I do think there was something unique about the last bull market with the billions and billions and billions of dollars of altcoin marketing being deployed to fool people into putting their money into scams instead of into Bitcoin, that just won't be nearly as loud or in the same way, or marketing into an audience that doesn't have counter signal coming from the Bitcoiners, and frankly, a lot of the TradFi space that has started to understand Bitcoin and Bitcoin not being like crypto, counting crypto as all the altcoins. So I don't know. I don't, even though I've obviously put out lots of research over the years about the diminished effect of halvings, and it is fascinating that the price rise leading up to the top of 2013 was exactly 550x from the bottom to the top of 2017 was 110x. So literally 1/5, and then it was exactly 22x from the bottom, so another 1/5. That's going to break. That's not happening. You can't have a bull market without it going up more than that. So at least that geometric decline in the price rises for each cycle is broken, basically with this next bull run. So I think it'll be over time a little bit more of a random walk, and there'll be like raging bull cycles and small bull cycles. And the idea that you would go, 35x between now, getting through 2 more bull cycles before then, still seems pretty reasonable. I'm not backing off that prediction. And with that, what's really cool is you only need probably like $500,000 per Bitcoin, so about half that to get to the point where you should see an explosion in the use of Bitcoin as medium of exchange, even in the Western world. So not just kind of edge use cases and niche markets and people attempting to kind of push adoption in local situations, but actually having a lot of people that want to start spending some Bitcoin because it's run up enough. Their expectations of the future price appreciation, or the future appreciation in purchasing power, I should say. We're not going to be denominating things in fiat very long.
Well, yeah. I mean, $1 million per Bitcoin in a fiat that's debased to what, I mean, that does put things in perspective a little bit.
Yeah. I've always been a little fuzzy on that, whether we're talking about nominal terms or real terms. I've always said in current day dollars, and I think that prediction for me goes back to 2020. So I would say like in 2020 dollars. So you're probably looking at something like, if that comes true according to my 2020 prediction, you'd be looking at like $1.2 or $1.3 million a coin.
All right. And how do you see Bitcoin moving, let's say, in 30 years' time from that? I mean, at what point do you see it becoming a global standard? Do you see it becoming a global standard?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is one of those things we need to recognize, that Bitcoin is not a product. It's not following a product S-curve like the launch of the iPad or the launch of a social network or something like that. This is a technological revolution. This is something like the advent of steam power or mass production or the information revolution. And these things take, you note them because they disrupt all industries, not just one. And they take 5 to 8 decades. So if you've never read a book called Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital by Carlota Perez, that's where I kind of got the framework, and I've written about this a lot, mostly on Twitter. You guys follow me on Twitter? I do like the tweeter. But yeah, so you look 30 years out, I think we will have progressed to Bitcoin as a mature, widely used global store of value. It will be a widely used global medium of exchange. It'll have broken down lots of friction and false borders between people, and it's now starting to usher in, a new era of, peace and, human prosperity and freedom, because we're able to conduct commerce with each other through the language of money, and commerce brings peace. So it'll be kind of like the resurrection of the Phoenician Empire writ large and global. And obviously it will also follow that Bitcoin will be at least one of the major units of account. I think the dollar will probably still be around if I'm sort of handicapping 30 years from now. We'll still have the dollar and maybe a couple of other fiat currencies, but you will also be able to price goods and services globally in Satoshis by then.
All right, I know we're out of time, but I do have a final question for you. I'm gonna ask it very quickly, though. You mentioned Satoshi, I mentioned Satoshi. You have so much of your personal life and professional life invested in Bitcoin. I know you shared with me that you were a former journalist. Journalists are inquisitive by nature. Does it bother you on any level that we still don't have clarity on the origins of this phenomenon, this extraordinary phenomenon that you are so invested in and believe in so strongly? Does the fact that there's a big question mark over who is Satoshi cause any kind of unease for you?
Literally zero. Doesn't bother me at all. I think it's fun, but it doesn't matter at this point. Really, it's come too far, and we kind of understand what Bitcoin is. I don't think Satoshi is ever coming back. I also don't think that any of the named potential candidates for Satoshi are Satoshi. Not a single one of them. I think whoever Satoshi was did a really good job of hiding their identity and disappeared.
All right. I know some have said that it actually gives it a more godlike quality to not know what the origin is, that it helps in the theory of creation. So I'm going to leave it on that note. I'm very excited to see what we can expect from next year's Pacific Bitcoin. So hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up then and see if Prophet Cory, because you've been correct on many of your forecasts, is in fact on the money, and if you're still the reigning champion out there on the basketball court. All right, thank you.
That's a swan.
Cool, thanks. Thank you.
I know the feeling, you got the fever.